For 9,000 years, the Zerath Dominion had ruled the stars with unshaken power. Across more than 100 systems, their name inspired both awe and fear. Their ships glided like blades of light. Their cities shimmered with towers of silver and crystal. And their soldiers moved with discipline so precise that many thought them more machine than flesh. But the true heart of the Dominion was not its armies, nor its fleets, nor even its endless wealth. The core of its strength was something far older, something guarded more carefully than any treasure. It was the apex lineage, a bloodline so pure that not a single drop of foreign touch had ever stained it. From the first emperor to the present ruler, every heir was bred to perfection, sculpted in mind and body to embody the will of the Dominion. For 9,000 years, no outsider had ever touched them. No foreign marriage, no alien embrace, no compromise. Purity was the Dominion's shield. Purity was its strength, or so the elders whispered. The palace of the apex lineage stood at the center of the Dominion's capital world, Azirath Prime. It was a world of dark skies and burning suns, where silver towers reached above the clouds and rivers of energy ran through the ground like veins of living fire. At the highest spire of the palace lived Prince Kalor, heir to the throne. Kalor was tall, with eyes that glowed faintly gold in the darkness, a mark of his ancient blood. His face carried the perfect symmetry demanded of the lineage. His voice was calm, cold, and exact. Every step he took was measured, every word chosen with care. From childhood he had been trained to be the perfect heir. Emotion was weakness. Affection was distraction. Duty was everything. Every day, Kalor's tutors repeated the creed. The lineage is unbroken. The lineage must remain pure. Purity is power. Purity is survival. Kalor never questioned it. To question was to doubt. To doubt was to betray 9,000 years of history. Yet outside the palace, the galaxy was changing. Rumors reached the court that a strange species from the outer reaches had begun to make its mark among the stars. They called themselves humans. Unlike most races, humans were small, fragile, and short-lived. But they had one quality that made them impossible to ignore: resilience. Where others broke, humans adapted. Where others surrendered, humans endured. They carried no ancient bloodline, no great empire, no perfect design. Instead, they carried something the Dominion considered dangerous: emotions. Humans were known to laugh in the middle of battles, to sing even while in chains, to weep for strangers, and to stand side by side with species not their own. To the Dominion, this was foolishness. To others, it was a mystery worth studying. Thus, for the first time in its long history, the Dominion extended an invitation. A human delegation would come to Zerath Prime. They would meet the apex lineage. They would be measured, studied, and understood. And when the Dominion was satisfied, they would be dismissed. To Prince Kalor, this was nothing more than a duty. He prepared to meet the humans with the same cold discipline he gave to every task. The day of arrival came. The great plaza before the palace filled with thousands of citizens, soldiers, and officials. The air shimmered with banners of silver flame. The people gathered not to honor the humans, but to witness the moment their ruler stood above them, untouchable and eternal. From the sky descended a single ship, small compared to the massive warcraft of the Dominion. Its hull bore no marks of conquest, only the simple emblem of Earth. As the ship touched down, a hush fell across the plaza. The first to step out was a woman named Alara Stone, chosen by Earth not for her strength or wealth, but for her spirit. She wore no armor, carried no weapon. Her clothes were plain, her posture calm. What set her apart was her eyes, clear, open, and warm. The citizens of Zerath watched her with suspicion. Where was her fear? Where was her awe before the apex lineage? She stood as though she were meeting equals, not gods. Prince Kalor stepped forward to greet her. His golden eyes met hers, and for a moment the plaza seemed to hold its breath. "Alara Stone of Earth," Kalor said, his voice smooth and commanding. "You stand before the apex lineage. Remember your place." Alara did not bow as deeply as others expected. She inclined her head politely, but her smile never faded. "And you stand before humanity, Prince Kalor. I thank you for welcoming us." A ripple of shock moved through the crowd. No one had ever spoken to the air so directly. Kalor felt a flicker of something he did not recognize. It was not anger, though he wished it were. It was not fear, though he thought she should fear him. It was something else. Curiosity. The days that followed were filled with endless talks and ceremonies. The Dominion displayed its fleets, its towers, its warriors. Each time the humans watched with wide eyes, but Ilara never looked impressed. Instead, she asked questions no one dared ask. Do your people ever rest? Do they ever laugh? What joy do they have in their lives? To Kaelor, these questions were meaningless. Joy was irrelevant. Laughter was distraction. Rest was weakness. Yet he found himself answering her, if only to prove her wrong. But each answer left him unsettled. When she smiled at his words, he felt a strange warmth in his chest. When she laughed, the sound echoed in his ears long after she was gone. Kaelor told himself it was nothing. Just curiosity, just the study of an alien. But deep inside, the first crack had appeared. The court watched carefully. Elders whispered warnings. Do not let the human touch you. Do not let the human's weakness stain the lineage. Kaelor nodded. He repeated the creed. He reminded himself that for 9,000 years, the apex lineage had stood pure. Yet as he lay in his chamber that night, he found his thoughts returning to Ilara's smile. Her voice, her questions, for the first time in his life. The heir of the Dominion wondered, what if purity was not strength? What if something else lay beyond it? The stars outside his window burned cold and eternal. But in Kaelor's heart, something new had begun to flicker, something the Dominion had never prepared him for. The Zerath capital was alive with a tension Kaelor had never known before. For 9,000 years, the apex lineage had met foreign delegations with calm authority, showing power without falter. But these humans were different. They walked into the palace not with fear or awe, but with a quiet confidence that made Kaelor uneasy. Ilara Stone, the human ambassador, moved through the towering halls with a calm grace. Her steps made no sound on the polished floors, yet every eye in the room followed her. Guards shifted uneasily, not accustomed to someone entering with such ease, such lack of caution. She spoke softly to her companions, smiling at things Kaelor would have considered trivial. Kaelor watched from the high balcony as the humans passed through the grand entrance. His golden eyes narrowed slightly. Humans are unpredictable, he thought. They should fear us. They should bow. Instead, they walked upright, heads held high, shoulders relaxed. There was no pretense of submission, no careful mimicry of respect. They simply existed, and in their existence, they defied every law the Dominion had taught him. The first formal meeting took place in the Hall of Lineage, a vast chamber with ceilings so high that the tops disappeared into shadows. Crystalline light refracted through the walls, casting sparkling patterns on the polished floor. Statues of previous emperors perfectly posed lined the room, their eyes seemingly following every step of the humans. Kaelor entered last, as protocol demanded. The room fell silent. Even the air seemed to hold its breath. When the prince spoke, his voice carried without effort, smooth and commanding. Ilara Stone of Earth, Kaelor began, his golden gaze fixed on her. You have come far to meet the apex lineage. Know this, you stand among perfection. No human has ever walked these halls unbroken. No human has ever touched the bloodline. Remember your place. Ilara inclined her head, her eyes bright and clear. Thank you, Prince Kaelor. I am honored to meet you and the apex lineage. We come not to challenge, but to learn and to understand. Her words were simple, but her tone carried no fear. Kaelor felt a small, unfamiliar prick in his chest, a sensation he could not identify. The rest of the delegation remained quiet, carefully following her lead. Kaelor noticed how she treated her companions, not as subjects or soldiers, but as friends. She smiled at them, whispered encouragement, laughed quietly at small mistakes. To the Zerath, this was disorderly, almost offensive. To Kaelor, it was confusing. The court elders whispered warnings from their seats. Do not let her sway you, one hissed. She carries no honor. She carries only weakness, Kaelor nodded, outwardly calm. Yet when Ilara turned toward him again, her gaze steady and unafraid, he felt that prick in his chest grow stronger. Over the next days, the humans toured the palace and the capital. They asked questions Kaelor had never heard anyone ask. Why do your citizens bow even when no one commands it? Ilara asked one day. Because tradition demands it. Kaelor answered sharply. Ilara tilted her head. Do they bow because it feels right or because they are afraid? Kaelor frowned. They are afraid. That is how order is kept. Yet her question lingered in his mind long after the conversation ended. Later she asked, Do your people ever laugh? Kaelor hesitated. Laughter was unnecessary, a distraction. The apex lineage did not laugh. Rarely, he said at last. Ilara's smile widened. Then they have not lived fully. Humans laugh to feel even in danger. Laughter is strength. Kaelor's jaw tightened. Laughness, he reminded him. The palace of Zerath Prime had never seemed so suffocating. Prince Kaelor walked the same corridors he had known since childhood, yet everything felt different. The crystal walls gleamed as before, the polished floors reflected light in the same precise patterns, and the statues of his ancestors stared down at him with eternal judgment. Still, he felt unsettled. It was the humans, not their appearance, not their customs, but one human, Ilara Stone. Her presence had left a mark he could not erase. Each smile, each question, each simple, gentle gesture seemed to echo in his mind long after she had left the room. The week of formal meetings continued. Humans observed, humans asked, humans listened. Kaelor had expected irritation or impatience, but instead, he found himself answering sincerely. He explained the strict routines of the court, the rituals of the lineage, the expectations of perfection. And each time Ilara listened not with judgment but with curiosity. "Why do you forbid laughter?" she asked one day during a walk through the palace gardens. "It is a simple thing, yet your people deny themselves even this small joy." Kaelor hesitated. His tutors had drilled into him that laughter was distraction, that joy was irrelevant, that emotion was weakness. And yet as he glanced at her calm, open expression, he found himself answering honestly. "Because it is not necessary," he said carefully. Ilara tilted her head, observing him. "It is necessary. Humans laugh to survive. Laughter keeps us alive in ways weapons cannot. It makes our hearts strong." Kaelor wanted to dismiss it. He wanted to claim the superiority of the apex lineage, but for the first time he found no words that would make her go away. Her simple truths lingered like seeds planted in a hardened garden. Kaelor's tutors noticed the change immediately. Lessons began to feel hollow. He no longer recited the creeds with mechanical perfection. He asked questions. He lingered on thoughts he had never paused to consider. The elders whispered in alarm. "The lineage is faltering," one said. "The human influence is dangerous. She must be removed." But Kaelor could not act. He found himself drawn to Ilara in subtle ways. He would seek her out in the gardens, watch her study the strange plants and creatures, see her laugh softly at the smallest marvels of his world. She never sought to dominate or control. She never commanded. She simply existed, and in her existence, she unraveled his understanding of duty and purity. One evening, as the sun of Zerath Prime bled gold and red across the horizon, Kaelor followed her to a quiet pool in the palace gardens. The water reflected the sky, unbroken, calm. Ilara knelt beside it, tracing her fingers across the surface. "It is beautiful," she said, eyes reflecting the shimmering water. "Do you ever come here to feel it, Prince Kaelor? Or only to observe?" Kaelor frowned, uncertain how to answer. He had walked these gardens for ritual, for study, for duty, never for feeling. He had never considered that perhaps one could simply exist, simply appreciate. "I observe," he said finally, voice tight. Ilara smiled, but not mockingly. "Then perhaps you have yet to live." The word struck him harder than he expected. Yet to live. Had he lived at all in 9,000 years of duty and perfection? He could not remember. The thought was uncomfortable, but it stirred something dangerous. Curiosity, maybe even longing. The human's visit continued, and the cracks in Kaelor's resolve deepened. He began to notice things he had never allowed himself to see. The fatigue in his advisor's eyes. The quiet sadness in the servants who carried out rituals without joy. The rigid posture of soldiers trained to move as one. The apex lineage demanded obedience, perfection, and emotionless loyalty. But at what cost? Ilara asked him simple questions that forced reflection. "Why do your people hide from their feelings? Is duty more important than life? Does perfection make you happy?" Kaelor had no answers. Or rather, the answers he had been taught felt hollow. He tried to recite the old creeds, but the words tasted wrong on his tongue. He could not unhear her voice, could not ignore the way she made him feel something unfamiliar. The elders grew more alarmed. Kaelor had begun to slip from the strict discipline of the court. He laughed quietly at one of Ilara's jokes, a sound so soft that even the walls seemed to listen. He lingered on thoughts of her long after she left. He began to question rituals that had lasted millennia. They demanded he undergo purification, a process designed to erase distractions and reaffirm the purity of the lineage. Kalor refused. "I do not need purification," he said, voice steady. "I am not broken. The lineage is strong because it survives, yes, but perhaps strength is not only in perfection. Perhaps strength is also in understanding, in seeing and feeling." The elders gasped. Such words had never been spoken in the history of the lineage. They whispered warnings. The human has infected him. She has undone generations of discipline. Kalor did not care. He was beginning to see that the rules he had lived by were not absolute. He began to wonder whether 9,000 years of purity had truly been strength, or a prison. At night, Kalor often wandered the gardens alone. He watched the humans interact with each other, their laughter and comfort unsettling yet fascinating. He began to recognize the value of what they carried, something his ancestors had long denied. Ilara never tried to manipulate him. She did not demand his trust or loyalty. She offered only friendship, patience, and a warmth he could not resist. And in that warmth, Kalor felt the first stirrings of a truth he had never dared to imagine. Connection, even with a human, could be stronger than fear. One day, as Kalor and Ilara walked along the highest terrace of the palace, overlooking the sprawling city of Zerath Prime, she asked him quietly, almost as if sharing a secret, "Prince Kalor, why do you hide behind perfection? Why do you hide from your own life?" He did not answer immediately. He looked at her open eyes, at the simplicity of her question. And for the first time he did not try to hide anything. "I do not know," he said softly. "Perhaps I'm afraid," Ilara nodded gently. "Then maybe it is time to stop being afraid." Those words echoed in his mind long after she walked away. He knew the elders would be furious, that his tutors would scold him, that the lineage demanded obedience above all else. Yet he could not ignore the feeling that had begun to grow inside him. Something dangerous, something forbidden, something human. It was not love. Not yet. It was curiosity. It was a spark. And for Kalor, it was enough to begin breaking the walls that had held him for 9,000 years. The cracks in the lineage were small, almost invisible. A soft laugh, a lingering glance, a question he could not dismiss. But Kalor knew they were there, and he could not unsee them. For the first time in his life, the heir of the Apex lineage wondered whether the rules of 9,000 years were the truest measure of strength, or the heaviest chains. And somewhere in the heart of Zerath Prime, the human ambassador smiled quietly, unaware of the slow revolution she had begun in a prince's soul. The Apex lineage had stood unbroken for 9,000 years, but with one human's presence the first cracks had begun to appear. The sun had just begun to dip below the horizon of Zerath Prime, painting the sky with streaks of gold and crimson. The palace gardens, usually serene, were alive with the quiet sounds of evening, the soft hum of the energy streams that ran through the ground, the rustle of alien plants swaying in the breeze, and the distant whispers of palace guards returning to their posts. Prince Kalor walked slowly along the marble path, his thoughts heavy with questions that had no answers. For days his mind had been consumed by the human ambassador, Ilara Stone, and the strange feelings she inspired. Curiosity, warmth, and something deeper, something he could not yet name, pulled at him relentlessly. He paused near a cluster of glowing silver flowers, their petals reflecting the last rays of the dying sun. Ilara knelt there, gently brushing the flowers with her fingers. Her expression was calm, almost serene, but her eyes held a curiosity that seemed endless. "Beautiful," she whispered, barely audible. "Even the smallest things can carry life and light." Kalor stepped closer. "Why do you care so much about small things?" he asked, his voice betraying a hint of confusion. "Your world is tiny compared to the Dominion. These flowers, they do not matter." Ilara looked up at him, her gaze steady and gentle. "To some, perhaps not. But to me, every small thing has meaning. Every life, every moment, every touch matters. Humans understand that even the smallest gesture can change everything." Her words hung in the air. Kalor's chest tightened and he found himself unable to look away. He wanted to respond with the authority of his title, the perfection of his bloodline, but no words came. Instead, he stood silently, feeling a strange warmth he had never known. The tension between them had grown over the past week. Kalor had begun questioning the very principles that had guided him for 9,000 years. Duty and purity had always been absolute. Emotion had always been weakness. But now he felt the first cracks forming in the walls of his perfect world. Alara sensed it too. She did not push him or demand answers. She merely offered her presence, her calm energy and the quiet strength of her humanity. And in that presence, Kalor felt the impossible, a desire to reach out, to connect, to feel. The elders of the Dominion had warned him. Do not allow the human to influence you. Do not let her touch your mind, your body, your bloodline. They had threatened rituals, purification, even exile. The palace of Zerath Prime had never felt more tense. Rumors spread faster than wildfire. The prince of the Apex lineage had allowed a human to touch him. One small gesture, one human hug, had shattered the image of perfection that had stood unbroken for 9,000 years. Elders whispered urgently behind closed doors. This is unprecedented, one said. The lineage has been compromised. Every ritual, every law, every generation of purity undone by a single outsider. Another shook his head. We cannot allow this to continue. Purification is the only answer. Isolation, discipline. We must restore the bloodline before the citizens notice. But the citizens had already noticed. Kalor, once stoic and unyielding, walked the halls with a different air. There was a lightness in his step, a warmth in his gaze, and a curiosity in his golden eyes that had never been there before. He spoke to servants not as a ruler addressing subordinates, but as a man recognizing fellow humans. His smile, subtle but real, spread unease among the elders and awe among the people. The palace staff whispered quietly among themselves. The prince. He is different. He laughs, he talks. He cares, even the soldiers noticed. Their drills and formations, once rigid and lifeless, now carried a flicker of freedom. The Apex lineage had always been untouchable, perfect, untiring. But Kalor's change, subtle yet undeniable, reminded them of something they had long forgotten, that being alive was more than following orders. Alara's influence continued to ripple quietly but powerfully. She did not demand anything from Kalor. She simply existed with the calm certainty of a human who valued feeling as much as action. Her presence challenged centuries of rules and tradition. Prince Kalor, she said one evening as they walked through the palace gardens, you are not bound by the expectations of the past. You are more than the lineage. You are yourself. Kalor nodded. I feel it, he admitted. I feel something my tutors never allowed me to feel. Something I did not even know I could feel. Alara smiled. Then do not fight it. The lineage will survive, but it can only grow if it learns what it has denied for so long. The elders, however, were not convinced. They demanded immediate action. Kalor was summoned to the Great Hall, a massive chamber where the history of the Apex lineage was carved into walls of crystal. Every ancestor's gaze seemed to pierce him as he entered, judging him for the weakness they believed he had displayed. Prince Kalor, the High Elder began, voice cold and sharp. You have compromised the purity of the lineage. One act of foolishness has endangered 9,000 years of history. You must undergo purification immediately. Kalor's jaw tightened. For centuries, the words of the elders had been law. Obedience had been absolute, but now, he did not obey. I will not, he said firmly. The room fell silent. Purification will not restore purity. It will only restore fear. The lineage is not broken. It is changing. It is alive. And it will survive if it learns, if it feels, if it grows. The elders gasped in horror. Never before had a member of the lineage spoken such defiance. Their whispers grew into angry murmurs. Outside the palace, citizens and lower-ranking officials began to notice changes. Kalor spoke to them with kindness, acknowledging their efforts, listening to their concerns. Where once he would have given commands without response, now he conversed, laughed quietly, and smiled. The people were shocked. Many had never seen the heir speak without perfection in every gesture, every word. Yet something about this human warmth was contagious. Slowly, small acts of joy and kindness began to appear in the city. Children laughed in the streets, merchants greeted customers with smiles instead of rigid courtesy, and soldiers offered aid to citizens rather than merely enforcing laws. The unbroken chain of perfection had begun to unravel. The elders tried to intervene. They sent emissaries to Alara, demanding she leave immediately. They instructed Kalor to isolate himself and submit to the rituals of purification, but Kalor refused every order. "You cannot undo what I have felt," he told them. "You cannot erase what I have learned. Fear has kept the lineage strong for 9,000 years, but love, compassion, and choice will make it stronger. This is the future of the Dominion." The elders recoiled at his words. They could not comprehend that the prince, trained to perfection and obedience, had embraced human influence and chosen something different. For the first time, the Apex lineage faced a power it had never known: free will. Ilara watched the events unfold quietly, offering guidance when Kalor sought it, but never commanding or directing. She encouraged him to trust his instincts, to act with courage, and to see the strength in humanity's simplest lessons: empathy, connection, and warmth. Kalor felt the weight of responsibility, but it no longer crushed him. Instead, it inspired him. He began to address the Dominion not as subjects to be commanded, but as people to be heard. "Your strength does not come from perfection," he told the citizens gathered in the palace courtyard. "It comes from your hearts, your courage, your ability to feel. We have been bound by fear for too long. It is time to embrace what we have ignored for thousands of years." Gasps of shock rippled through the crowd. Some cheered, some whispered in disbelief, and some, the old and rigid, shook with anger at the audacity of the prince. The transformation was swift and unstoppable. Citizens began to act with compassion. Soldiers offered aid instead of enforcing strict discipline. Elders struggled to maintain control but found their authority weakening as Kalor's influence spread. Even Kalor's closest advisors, trained in tradition and perfection, began to see the power in what had been forbidden. They observed the effects of human warmth and empathy. They saw the loyalty that choice could inspire, and slowly some began to follow Kalor's lead. The Apex lineage, long untouchable and unyielding, was alive in a way it had never been before. The people no longer feared perfection. They admired humanity's strength, Kalor's courage, and the freedom to choose their own paths. At night, Kalor walked through the palace gardens alone. The city shimmered below, lights reflecting the stars above. For 9,000 years, the Dominion had stood unbroken, untouched, and perfect. And now, the foundation of that perfection had shifted. He thought of Ilara, of her gentle guidance, of her quiet strength. One human had entered the life of the Apex lineage and shown them what they had been missing: connection, empathy, and the courage to change. The prince smiled, a genuine, unrestrained smile. The cracks in the lineage had grown into open doors, and Kalor knew that nothing would ever return to the rigid perfection of the past. For the first time, the Apex lineage was alive, vibrant, and real. And the future of the Dominion was no longer determined by fear but by heart. The elders could only watch, powerless, as the lineage embraced its new reality. Their rituals of purification, their warnings, their centuries of tradition, they were no longer absolute. The people were changing. The prince was changing. The Dominion itself was changing. And in the quiet of the palace gardens, Kalor finally understood the truth that the humans had carried across the stars. Strength was not in perfection, obedience, or fear. True strength was in empathy, in choice, and in the courage to embrace the heart. One hug had undone 9,000 years of chains. Dawn broke over Zerath Prime with a brilliance that seemed almost alive. The city's towers sparkled under the twin suns, and the energy streams that ran through the streets shimmered like rivers of liquid light. The people stirred, not just in obedience, but with a quiet excitement, a sense that something had changed forever. Prince Kalor stood atop the highest terrace of the palace, overlooking the capital. His golden eyes traced the streets below, where citizens moved freely, smiling, laughing, and speaking to one another without fear. The Apex lineage had stood unbroken for 9,000 years, a symbol of perfection and discipline. Now it was something entirely new, alive, vibrant, and human in its essence. The elders were convening an urgent council, their faces grim. The words of the prince and the presence of the humans had undermined centuries of authority. No matter how they tried to enforce the old ways, the people had already begun to choose their own paths. Loyalty no longer came from fear but from respect and shared humanity. High Elder Voran spoke sharply, voice trembling with frustration. The lineage is corrupted. The traditions are meaningless. We cannot allow this. Kaler's voice echoed through the chamber, calm and unwavering. Tradition is not strength. Understanding, empathy, and choice are. You have led the Dominion with fear for centuries. But the people will thrive only when they are free to feel and decide. The elders recoiled at the audacity, but the citizens who had gathered outside the hall cheered quietly. Kaler had become more than a prince. He had become a symbol of hope, a living example of the power of human influence on even the most rigid empire. Alara Stone watched silently from the side, observing the transformation she had helped inspire. She did not claim credit. Humans rarely did. She simply knew that her small actions, a smile, a question, a hug, had carried more weight than armies or fleets. Kaler approached her, his expression softer than it had ever been. "You changed more than just me," he said quietly. "You reminded an entire empire what it means to be alive." Alara smiled. "You were ready to see it, Kaler. I only helped you recognize it. The rest is yours." In the following days, the changes became